Mark? Thanks.
Yes.
Okay, we're almost on time. The Internet of Things has the potential to create massive disruptions in telecommunications, cable, broadband, cloud computing, and even how we define the Internet. The next presentation explores trends and preconditions that are leading to the perfect storm of change in IoT. Our next speaker is Scott Amyx. Scott is the founder and CEO of Amyx McKinsey, a wearable strategy agency specializing in smart wearable strategy and development. As a thought leader in smart wearables computing and the Internet of Things, Scott explores the intersection of enterprise implications and consumer decisions of adopting wearables and IoT technologies. Scott has over 18 years of large-scale strategy and implementation experience, managing double-digit million-dollar projects across multiple verticals. In his last corporate position as VP of Product Management, Scott helped the company be acquired by a Fortune 500 publicly traded company. Scott has also started numerous startups and successfully sold the company. Scott holds a master's degree in applied microeconomics public policy from the University of Chicago and is a National Woodrow Wilson Sloan Fellow at Carnegie Mellon University. Please welcome Scott Amyx to the stage. Oh, there he is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario. Appreciate that. And as you can tell, I'm a little bit shorter. So I actually pay the two participants over there in dollars, so thank you for those questions. I think the dollars are at a higher currency. All right, so here's the deal. You know, kids say some of the darnest things. My daughter looks at me very seriously and says, "Dad, how come Mom, you know, when she speaks with such exuberance, and here you, when you speak, there's no expression on your face." And I kind of took that to offense, frankly, because I think I'm a pretty enthusiastic kind of guy. So I looked her right in the eye and I said, well, you know, I'm like this because this is just the way I was born. So anyways, if you're looking at me, this is my happy, enthusiastic self, so please. All right, so it's too bad Mo from Samsung's gone already, but you know, I have a son and a daughter, and my son loves to take things apart and just put them together using a generous portion of glue and a mishmash of tape. Well, I happen to be preparing for this talk, and my son comes over and says, "Hey, Dad, what are you working on?" I said, "Well, son, I'm going to give this talk about IoT and how it's going to potentially fix a lot of problems." He says, "IoT, huh? IoT, what is that? Is that, oh, I know, Dad. Is that instead of tape?" I say, "Yeah, son, that's exactly what it is." All right. So why is the Internet of Things such a popular topic these days? I mean, I think as you've heard throughout the day, you notice that a lot of these technologies have been around for years, right? So why now? Well, I'm going to tell you three things in my talk. One is, why now? And then secondly, what can we expect in the future? And again, I was kind of joking, but the two questions that were asked just previous to this exactly goes into what my presentation is going to be about. And then thirdly, what does that all mean for you? What's the implication, the key takeaways? I'm going to tell you a story. Some of you may have heard of Malcolm Gladwell. He's a best-selling author. And he tells a story about a shipping magnate, Malcolm McLean. And McLean is a child of the Great Depression. And at the age of 16, he drops out of school, works at a gas station, eventually making a name for himself in the trucking industry. Now, most of us, you know, I think, fortunately for those maybe that live in a port area can appreciate this more, is that the ocean freight containers is a pretty logistical, amazing thing, you know, the way it goes from one country to another. Well, back in the 1950s, you know, the process of loading and unloading cargoes onto ships was incredibly time-consuming and inefficient. Now, one of the things from a vision that McLean had was being able to turn the back of a trailer retractable so they could easily take containers on and off, right? Now, the problem was, of course, that ideal wasn't new. Matter of fact, people were working on containers for some 30 years prior to that, much like what we're seeing with the Internet of Things. And the problem with containers was that, as you can imagine, they're very heavy and they're bulky and they're cumbersome, all of which drives up the cost of handling cargoes. Well, McLean, being an innovator, recognized that, well, there's potentially this technology that's available in an adjacent market. So he recognized in the lumber industry, they use these cranes, unlike the shipping industry, that are much sturdier. I mean, they're able to pick up massively heavy lumber. And he said, you know, why don't we actually try and experiment with that? So he did. So he applied the lumber cranes to pick up these containers and load them onto ships, unload them onto trains, and then to his trucks, and it worked. The point is that it only took 30 years for it to happen. That's exactly where we are with the Internet of Things. See, for shipping, everything from railroad, port infrastructure, to ships capable of handling stackable containers, to finally the cranes that could handle the weight of these containers. Well, wearables and things are no different. But why now? Well, like you've heard throughout pretty much today, it's these preconditions that's coming together, such as cloud computing, big data, mobile computing, 3G, 4G, LTE, to lower cost of hardware, which you've heard, to continuing trend towards miniaturization. All of this is driving the change that we're talking about. Like I mentioned, I have a daughter, and she's always been a thumbsucker ever since she was born, and we knew that it was a serious problem when one day my wife and I were driving, and we heard this terrifying shriek coming from the back, and we're thinking, wow, something awful must have happened. So I looked through my rearview mirror, and guess what I see? Here's this little innocent baby sucking on her thumb, twirling her hair with her index finger, which in itself is quite a feat, and her finger got stuck in her hair, and she couldn't get it out. And of course, the hardest part was not actually being able to laugh or laugh with her. But we tried everything from hot sauce, thumb guards, to photos from the internet of kids with crooked teeth. Nothing worked, nothing at all. It finally took age, peer pressure, and the incentive of ice cream for her to finally stop. Well, she's in 5th grade, and that was last year. Okay. All right. So what does this all mean, and what can we expect in terms of the future? Well, in order for us to answer that question properly, we need to actually look at some of the trends and preconditions leading to that. So one of those things is around what you've heard, M2M sensors. So in the future, we can actually anticipate that these embedded sensors will actually have much more powerful processors embedded in them. So for example, Intel is actually working on their 10 nanometers processor CPU by 2016. And if you look at their product roadmap, I think they're striving for even smaller 5 nanometer, for instance. The other precondition to IoT disruption is around memory. So we can anticipate that over time that memory capacity, RAM capacity, is only going to increase. And we know that's happening because, for example, Toshiba recently announced their smallest class NAND memory flash products, for instance. That's some 26% smaller than comparable products. Now, so what that means is these sensors that we just kind of take for granted, right, that does the gyroscope, the compass, and so forth, they're actually going to be, at some point in the future, more powerful and faster and smarter than the PCs of today. I mean, that's a very really powerful message. Another trend that's happening is around open Wi-Fi. So the openwireless.org initiative, for instance, encourages people to share their Wi-Fi. And the reason for that is, according to the research, much of the idle, locked wireless networks sit idle most of the day. So we can actually tap into this underutilized bandwidth while still allowing the router's owner to take priority when needed. And for guest users, we can actually allow for encryption using EAP TLS, something equivalent to HTTPS, that provides that security for them. Another interesting precondition, and I can't list all of them, but some of them, is Li-Fi. So you see a lot of these light sockets, right? Well, these light sockets with LED bulbs will actually be a very interesting technology that emits and becomes an internet access point. So rather than using radio frequencies like what most of us are accustomed to seeing, these use the visible light spectrum to actually send and transmit this information. Essentially, what you have through Li-Fi is just ubiquitous, high-speed, wireless access network that provides higher safety, higher security, and higher data density than Wi-Fi. So pretty interesting stuff. And then one last condition, and I'll move on, is around mesh networks or decentralized networks. And I think that was a question that was asked before. These things are peer-to-peer networks that are created by daisy chaining your phone. Your phone essentially becomes a router to nearby phones using Bluetooth or Wi-Fi. And this is a really important piece because the more devices, the more nodes, the more powerful it becomes. These don't need any type of Wi-Fi nodes or cell towers. They cannot be controlled by any central organization. There is no single IP to block. And that's part of the reason why that governments can't seem to shut these things down. So, apps such as FireChat and standards such as the multi-peer connectivity, Wi-Fi P2P have been used in the recent Hong Kong protests as an example. So when all of these are taken into consideration, what's the implication? Well, the implications are pretty significant, matter of fact. So it has the potential to displace or disrupt telecom carriers, and I've spoken to some of you already and what that means, because this can actually help them alleviate some of their infrastructure costs and lay, or they can actually start to erode into their revenue stream. So pretty powerful stuff. You can actually start to harness the power of the IoT network for supercomputing processing. You have the ability to shift consumer private data from the cloud data service providers to your personal area networks or your private cloud, all the while driving down the cost of mobile data communication. So pretty amazing stuff. Now, today's 3G, 4G LTE network requires that all mobile data must go through the carrier's access point network, APN, to connect to the internet, right? Well, with the sheer growth, projected growth of IoT sensors and wearables, we can anticipate that executives like yourselves and entrepreneurs will start to question the current network paradigm, especially as researchers, as some of you are, start to or continue to look in and explore other communication approaches, such as peer-to-peer, like we talked about. Well, it has the potential to not only run in parallel to the existing internet, but potentially bypass the internet altogether, so that communication can actually occur between wireless sensor clusters. And more so, over time, we can actually choose to opt in and allow our personal area networks to communicate with the broader wireless sensor networks. So that communication actually occurs between these nodes rather than through the internet. So pretty amazing stuff. All right. So let me tell you a little story. My daughter, she loves to talk. Matter of fact, the amazing thing is she's able to do it without breathing, which I don't know how she's able to do it. My son, on the other hand, he's not able to share a lot. I asked him, how's your day, son? He said, it's fine. Son, can you tell me a little bit more about that? He says, well, it was a good, fine day, Dad. All right, let me try a different tactic. Tell me just one thing that was really exciting that happened at school. He says, Dad, well, there's this girl in my class, and she likes this other boy. And at every recess, she chases him around the courtyard and then pins him down to the ground and then kisses him right on the lips. I said, oh my, that's really interesting. And what do you do? He says, well, I scream, Johnny, she's coming, run. And after that, I just stopped asking him about his day. Well, the point there is, in terms of what we can anticipate in the future, is that collecting data, as you've heard today, isn't enough. You need to mine for answers, not just data. Okay? So let me switch over to what you can anticipate and what are the key takeaways for executives and entrepreneurs here. It means that IoT is not going to happen in a single leap, but rather it's going to happen in gradual series of innovations. So in the short term, it means that the focus is going to be on industrial sensors using existing technologies tuned for the home or for industrial conditions, like you've heard. Now, during this stage of sensing things, these sensors are going to passively transmit data to servers. Then you have the platform and services layer, much like you've heard from IBM, that's going to act as a glue to bring all these sensors together. Okay? Now, as we go from sensing things, we move on to automated things. In the automated things, this is where these sensors begin to actually communicate with one another and start to execute a series of tasks. So let me give you an example. Let's say you have a meeting across town. Your ambient system, and I'll talk about it in just a second, recognizes that you're coming downstairs to head over to your next meeting across town. Well, it sends a signal to your driverless car. Driverless car comes up to the front of the building. It's already taken the location from your calendar, entered into GPS. As you enter your car, your windshield gets projected with today's agenda, the meeting minutes from last time, the open action items, today's attendees and their bios. So that by the time that you arrive at your destination, you're fully briefed in terms of being ready for that meeting. You have all your presentation and files ready to share in the cloud. So really amazing stuff, right? Now, after automated things will come AI things. And let me just pause here for a second. For some of you that are in the enterprise space, I think you'll appreciate a few points I'm going to call out here, is that we've come from the days of big ERP installs to now we're shifting over to cloud ERP solutions. Well, I forecast that we're going to go from ERP to EAI, and this is really what I mean by ambient systems. EAI stands for Enterprise Artificial Intelligence. As you've heard from Mo, from Samson, the future of the intellectuals and human capital that's going to be coming from universities needs to really understand cognitive science, machine learning, statistical analysis, big data. I mean, that's where things are going to be at. What this means is that people are going to expect smarter things. So Gartner, in their recent report, talked about computing everywhere, context-rich systems, where people will come to expect that they can compute just about anywhere, and that smart machines will be able to think for themselves and do things in an autonomous manner, right? So that's really where things are headed. So a couple of more points, and then I'll wrap it up here. For some of you, perhaps maybe you've worked with an ERP system, maybe like a CRM, yes? Well, what do you hear from the sales guys? That they love their CRM system? Number one tool? No, the reality is that CRM tools can be a bit of a nightmare in terms of maintenance and upkeep, right? Because in order for management to have any visibility into the sales pipeline, it requires their salespeople or their assistants to enter their activities into the system. Well, all of that's about to change because in the not too far distant future, people will come to expect that they should be able to interface with their enterprise tools via smart glasses, smart watches, via projections, screens, even in cars. More so that their EIA, ambient system, becomes smarter, more intelligent, including ability to take notes for them, isolate the critical points from the sound bites. The facial recognition system component of the EAI starts to understand the emotions of meeting attendees, check for congruence of their emotions with the words spoken. The voice analysis component of EAI gauges and detects your emotions behind your speech. Now, we at Amyx and McKinsey, we do more than just look at the future and ask tough questions about where is wearables and IoT going. We also put into action, so we test our theories out as well. So one of the things that we're working on with some of the leading wearable startups and researchers, and we're talking to U of T as well, is around this notion around wearable emotion sensing. So there's an article that's going to be published in January of next year on IEE, one of the publications that's coming out. But basically what it talks about is this ability to be able to, in a cognitive science, within the paradigm of effective computing, the ability to be able to quantify the emotions of people as they interact with different things, and particularly within brand engagement context. It means that in a retail setting, retailers can actually start to understand better what an in-store customer likes or doesn't like in terms of their appeal, and be able to, in real time, make recommendations beyond just beacon technology. Okay? It means that at hotels, and thank you, I'm enjoying Park Hyatt, so appreciate that. At hotels, it means that hotels can more concretely actually start to measure the experience of their customers as they interact with the hotel staff, as they enjoy the spa, as they eat at the restaurants. Okay? Film companies Beyond what they do with pilots, they can start to really, really quantify metrically, quantitatively, a pilot that they preview before they commit to a full movie production to gauge the probability of success, right? So everything from cultural experiences, festivals, to live events, wearable emotion sensing, what we're calling as brand emotions, has a potential to quantify the emotions of participants in regards to their experience. Matter of fact, we're actually working with a startup called Element. Maybe you've heard of them. Element is a high-end wearable jewelry for women. And they've received tremendous fanfare in the luxury and fashion industry. And we're working with them to be able to apply our technology to fashion shows. So imagine that this is a fashion show. Obviously, I'm not quite fashionable. But depending on what I'm wearing or what the collection happens to be, we can actually start to measure people's response to a collection, a particular outfit. So if you represent a design firm or a boutique brand, we can actually know exactly what you're going to want, what you want to order when you leave that show. All right, let's wrap it up. So we talked about sensing things, automated things, AI things. Here's the scary part. You ready? We're going to be all replaced. No. This may kind of scare you a bit, but in the AI phase, it doesn't mean, let's just be very clear, it doesn't mean that machines become sentient. That's not where things are headed yet. Rather, it just means that machines become smarter, more intelligent. Now, what is going to potentially scare you is that innovation, where it used to be a monopoly for humans, isn't going to be a monopoly for us anymore because machines will be actually assisting us. So we'll be co-creating. That's pretty interesting stuff. So for executives and entrepreneurs, what does this all mean? What's the wrap-up here? The wrap-up is that at every stage of the life cycle of the IoT maturity life cycle, there is an opportunity for business exploitation or product extension or new market definition, redefinition. So there's a tremendous amount of stuff, and I think this goes back to the question around business analysis. So we're just starting to scratch the surface in terms of business use cases, and I've spoken with Amir before he left, and the potential of his platform, what it can do, and it's really only up to our imagination. So on this note, let me just wrap it up by saying that at the heart of the matter of what IoT is really about is the velocity of innovation. Velocity of innovation. Just as we've seen with the internet and mobile, the future of wearables and IoT has the potential to not only drive down the cost of mobile data communication costs, but it has the ability to disrupt innovation itself so that game-changing knowledge, not Google knowledge, but game-changing knowledge becomes available not only for a few, but becomes available to literally just about everybody in the world. And this is really at the heart of what IoT means. Thank you.
Any questions from the audience?
So I agree with you that the knowledge becoming available to anyone or anything is one of the goals of the Internet of Things. Of course, there are a lot of blockers to that because it really empowers a much larger base of people, machines, technologies, and businesses. How do you think we'll overcome that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Matter of fact, when I was in DC a couple of days ago giving a keynote speech, I spoke with the Homeland Security's Department Undersecretary and the assistant. And I think there's recognition, and I wrote an article recently on Information Week about the role that government needs to play. So when it comes to certain sets of industries or sectors, especially nascent ones like this one, it requires thoughtful collaboration, consortiums, but also government involvement. So I know we've heard from Anne around privacy. Some of these things can't just be assumed that the private sector will just automatically internalize. You need to have legislation, frameworks, and enforcement. And I think that's an important piece to ensure that the fostering of an ecosystem is done in an orderly fashion with the right results. Any other questions? Yes.
Back to the question that I asked.
Distributed network, yeah?
Yeah, so I wonder about that a little bit. I mean, it's hard to predict.
Yeah.
You can never be looking to the future. You need to be looking at similar stuff as right
Yeah.
now. But obviously something new comes. It's very disruptive.
Yeah.
Not necessarily first,
Yeah.
sensors are getting smarter
Mhm.
and store data that you can do there. I still wonder
So,
Internet of Things will be
yeah, so the question is, will the Internet of Things be really as disruptive as people say? And I think probably the best way to do it is we can analyze, we're all intellectuals. Most of us have our masters or PhDs and postdocs. But the reality is this, keep it very simple. 90% of things around the world are not connected. The chairs, the tables, the lights, the walls, this building, the floor, the soil, the river, the bridges, the cars. So when these things, 90% things become connected, not only the inanimate, but as you've heard from Tara, animate, meaning things that can be moving, robotic things, then you have potentially very disrupting things. Because much like you've heard from the gentleman from the mining industry, a lot of the industries, the old industries that were somewhat shielded from the internet and mobile computing will be forced to change. So I project that IoT will be as big as the Industrial Revolution for this scale. It's going to be huge because you're starting to bring farming, you're starting to bring oil and utilities, you're going to take logistics to another level, you're going to bring warehousing and other things. It's going to bring industries that were backwards. Many of you probably heard of use cases around healthcare, how Google Glass is being used at hospitals and telecare and so forth. The reality is, a lot of these hospitals and doctor groups are behind the date. They're just barely trying to get over the electronic medical systems and records. They have so much far to go before they even come to, concrete conversations on wearables and IoT. So the potential is massive. So if I'm Tata, and I've given talks at Samsung in Korea, I've given talks in Shanghai, I'm going to be talking in Berlin to Bosch as well. The potential of this thing is massive because everything that you see around here, including cups and forks, can have sensors as well. And they can talk to one another. And I really believe, like you said, that the cloud's not going away. But rather, there's going to be a greater, if I'm Cisco, which I know they're thinking through, if I'm Arrow and others, they're already thinking about the possibility of the networking power going from the cloud and enterprise to individuals, especially for data protection reasons. So that's going to be really interesting stuff. And I know, speaking with a Stanford professor, there is a tool or platform called Omelette that basically challenges the current paradigm around who owns the data, the proprietary Googles and the Dropbox and the likes, or us. She says that basically following almost the privacy principles that Anne laid out, basically have created this platform called Omelette. So I think we're heading towards that direction. So very good question. Any other questions?
Yeah, well, no, I completely agree with you. I think we underestimate how disruptive the Internet of Things is going to be. It's going to challenge a lot of things like network providers. I don't think it's going to challenge the cloud.
Yes. Yes.
So much data, so much
Yes.
cannot do it in one way at the same time.
Yes. So the comment is that it's not just going to challenge the telecom, it's going to challenge the cloud and just about everybody else. I have to be selective in who I attack based on the attendance. So there was a question in the back.
You kind of mentioned these two competing forces. One is just creativity discovery of philosophy, and the other is government's regulation.
Yeah.
And typically regulation is
Yeah. Okay, so the question is from the back, and I appreciate that. I always appreciate an intellectual. So he found the slippery logic in my argument, so I appreciate that. No. The point was, how do you rectify this argument around regulation versus, greater innovation? Much like what Anne was saying, innovation. If you look at Milton Friedman's, indices around freedom and economic stimulation, you know that, government regulation doesn't always top up there. I think if you actually read my article, you'll know that I'm actually not pro-regulation, but rather that the government needs to put a framework together. And that framework doesn't necessarily have to include regulation in the sense of what you're probably thinking. We probably have to define what that means. But framework in terms of what do we as a country, Canada, US, or Germany, or UK, what do we want to actually achieve in the next decade or two? And how are we going to do so? And how are we going to partner with the private sector to do so? Because regulation to me seems a little bit negative, but rather they need to partner up, and the private sector, the consortiums have to agree that yes, this makes sense from a self-administering, self-enforcement. But then there is an enforcement component because there's HIPAA and other things where we do have to protect the consumers. Okay, I think we're out of time, right? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Scott.